Welcome everyone to the Thursday edition of our Packers News live chat. Alongside Ryan Wood, I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers strapped on their pads and hit the practice field, gearing up for their game this weekend against the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll get you all caught up on practice and injuries in just a moment. However, before we get into any of that, as always, we want to hear from you. This is your show as well. Leave us a comment down in the chat over on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube. Ryan and I will get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. Even though the Packers are 6-2, Packers fans, you know this well, it has not been smooth sailing for this team. The Cheeseheads have been put through the grater, watching 14 of their starters inactive for a number of these games this season. At Week 10, finally, the Packers have an opportunity to get as close to full health as humanly possible. Wide receiver Allen Lazard has been on injured reserve for the last several weeks. However, he is eligible this week to come off. How likely is it that the Packers activate him against the Jaguars?
Matt LaFleur left the door open to that possibility. Our Jim Ozarski today asked him, and he I thought it was a good question from Jim. He said, if is there any consideration to maybe giving them the extra week or not? Didn't go out and say because you're playing Jacksonville, but might as well. And Matt LaFleur very quickly closed that down and said, no, if they're ready to play, both Allen Lazard and Christian Kirksey, they're going to play. So if they can get off IR, with Allen Lazard, they don't have the injury designation, but both these guys really, Allen Lazard especially, from what I've noticed, doing the same stuff he did last week. So the same drills, he's going through individual drills in practice. I think it's certainly a possibility. With that said, they do have that extra week that they can afford to keep them on IR.
The inside linebackers room has been extremely banged up this season. Christian Kirksey is on IR. Kamal Martin has only played a couple of games. It has been the undrafted free agent Chris Barnes show. He leads the team in tackles with 50 total, and he only has 5 missed tackles. However, Christian Kirksey is eligible to come off of IR this week in addition to Allen Lazard. How likely is it that the Packers decide to activate him this weekend?
Yeah, same thing, I think. It'll be very interesting when he does come back, and it certainly could be this week. I haven't seen him as much in practice as I've seen Allen Lazard. You might be able to speak better to this because you're inside the Hudson Center. But what's going to be interesting with him, Olivia, is when he does come back, how does he factor into that rotation? Because you've got Kamal Martin, who is now off the COVID-19 reserve list. You have Chris Barnes, who is on the COVID-19 reserve list and is dealing with a calf strain as it is as well. But both of those guys over the long term have kind of established themselves on this depth chart. Maybe neither can play this week, but over the long term, these are ascending players on this defense now. So how does the veteran factor in with the young guys will be very interesting to see.
Martin is a draft pick of 2020. Chris Barnes was an undrafted free agent in 2020. Regardless of where Kirksey ends up playing specifically on the field, how does his experience benefit that inside linebacking core?
Well, remember, he was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, so he knows Mike Pettine's system and has spent more time in Mike Pettine's system than either of the two rookies, even if he hasn't been here. He's been here in Green Bay the same amount of time. There's more of a well of information that goes back with this Pettine playbook. So that certainly can help stabilize some things. Again, like I said, they are ascending players, so they got to find snaps for those guys. There's no question about that. I think coming into the season, there was a bit of a low bar for this inside linebacker group, at least on the outside, and they've exceeded those expectations. The young guys, even with the uncertainty, the COVID-19 at that position, Kamal Martin having the knee surgery. He's after that really good truncated training camp that he had, but he had a solid training camp. Surgery, came back, looked good. I think they've exceeded those expectations. It's just a matter of having a guy who's got a lot more background in that system kind of joining them.
Good news for the Packers. The offensive line could also be getting back to some semblance of full health, whatever full health really looks like with this team in this league. With left tackle David Bakhtiari, he practiced today in a full capacity in pads for the first time in almost a month. Especially with backup tackle Rick Wagner dealing with a knee injury, he was limited today in practice. However, his status for Sunday is uncertain. The Packers could certainly use Bakhtiari, especially against a Jaguars defense that's fifth in the league in quarterback knockdowns. How likely is it that Bakhtiari is ready to go on Sunday?
Yeah, if he's full participant, he's going to play. And he's full participant both of these 2 days. He's got to get through another day and then no setback that you can see on Saturday. But if he's full participant, he's going to play. So it sure looks good for David Bakhtiari right now. Of all the players on that pretty lengthy injury report that are out, that's the one guy that we can look at and say there's concrete evidence here that he's, as Matt LaFleur said today, trending in the right direction. So I would certainly expect that he'll be available against the Jaguars.
Let's continue our conversation with some of your questions over on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube. It is lovely to see you all on this Thursday night. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll start with Brandon. Brandon wants to know, how is cornerback Jaire Alexander doing? Alexander has been dealing with a concussion that he sustained against the 49ers last week on Thursday night. He has not practiced at all this week. How likely is it that he'll be ready for Sunday?
Doesn't look real likely. It's tough, Brandon, to predict with the concussion protocol because you see all kinds of timelines once the guys get in that protocol. But usually you at least see a player who's in the protocol on the field practicing before they actually clear the protocol. That's kind of the final step. They got to be on the field. They're still in the protocol, but then they move around. They see how their baseline checks out, and then they're able to graduate from that. We haven't seen Jaire Alexander on the field. So it does not look very good for Jaire Alexander being available this week. And I think at some point you start to wonder about next week as well.
Thanks so much, Brandon, for your question. We appreciate it. Let's take a question here from Andrew. Andrew, good to see you. Andrew wants to know, does Robert Tonyan, tight end, get involved this week? He has been kind of quiet. If you look back over the last few games this past week against the 49ers, he was only targeted once. He had a 5-yard reception. And you continue to go back, he hasn't quite lived up to his performance against the Atlanta Falcons when he was targeted 6 times, 6 receptions for almost 100 receiving yards. How likely is it that we see more from Tonyan going forward?
Good fix there on the Tonyan, because that gets me all the time too. Sorry to point that out. I think it's understandable. I've said it one way for 3 years now, but yes, Robert Tonyan. Here's the reality. He's not going to catch 3 touchdowns every game because if I'm not good at math, but if he did, that would be 48, and that's just not going to happen. So, going back to the Vikings game, it was a loss. Yeah, I think he was the leading receiver with 79 yards, yardage-wise. Obviously, Devontae Adams had 3 touchdowns, but yardage-wise, I think Tonyan was the leading receiver. 4 days later, San Francisco, 1 catch, 5 yards. You're going to see that a little bit. The reality is this. I looked this week. The Packers last year, for the first time ever in a 16-game season, had only 1 receiver with at least 500 yards. Of course, that was Devontae Adams. Only 1. This year, both Tonyan and MVS are identical at 314. Each have 314 yards apiece at 8 games, which if you do the math, again, not very good at it, but if you do the math, that's on track for over 600 yards. They are getting more depth. And it was a historically low bar for them to pass with how little depth they had in the receiving core last year. But they are getting more depth in the receiving core this year, and Robert Tonyan is a big part of it. Even if he's not going to catch 3 touchdowns every week, he has showed up more than 1 game, and he is a big part of that expanded depth that they have in their passing game.
Thank you, Andrew, for being a part of the conversation as always. Tonyan. We're going to work on that. We're going to drill it into my head.
Habits die hard.
It's going to. I apologize in advance. Our friend in Germany, Marcel, thank you for staying up late to chat with us. Marcel asks, is defensive lineman Montravius Adams the most exciting / improved player next to Kenny Clark, or is it still too early to tell? Montravius Adams has been somewhat disruptive, especially in the backfield. Over the last 4 games, he's had 2 tackles for a loss. Who is the most improved player on this defensive line? Is it Montravius Adams?
Montravius Adams is a good candidate. You also have Kingsley Keke, who's also been really good. And the stats show better for Kingsley Keke, but I think both of those guys have had their moments. neither one has been able to be consistent and iron those inconsistencies out. But both have flashed potential, and that's big. You know, with Montravius Adams, he's in the final year of his contract. This is a huge year for him. He was late to develop at Auburn as well. It took him a little bit of time. He came into Auburn as a 5-star recruit, a real jewel of his recruiting class, and it took him some time. And then he was, I think, his junior year, first team All SEC, and he was able to kind of catch up. You're seeing that a little bit, not the same parallel, but you're seeing that a little bit, I think, here where he does look like he's playing quicker. The game is slowing down for him. And there's no question with Montravius Adams that athletically he is about as gifted as it gets. I mean, he's quick twitch, he's very explosive, and he's got all the tools that you need as an interior defensive lineman. It's a matter of just doing his assignment and making sure that he's assignment sound and doing his job. And those sound like really boring things, but when you don't, it's noticeable. So I do think that the game's slowing down. It's just a matter of continuing to develop. And whether, you know, I think you can say the same thing about Kingsley Keke in his second season, kind of ironing out those inconsistencies and flashing more often than not.
Thank you so much, Marcel, for chatting. As always, we appreciate it. Let's take a question here from Wiley over on Facebook. Wiley asks, will the Packers activate wide receiver Seth Roberts, who's currently on the practice squad? The Packers picked up 7-year veteran wide receiver Seth Roberts not too long ago. We keep getting a lot of questions, comments about him specifically, and I think it's just the nature of the wide receiver position. But what makes him so unique is that he has all this experience and he is sitting on the practice squad. He spent most of his career with the Oakland Raiders. 4 years, he was most recently with the Carolina Panthers, I believe. How likely is it that the Packers could utilize a player like Seth Roberts at some point down the road now that they can activate some of their practice squad players for game day?
Yeah, it's possible. You know, Equinemi St. Brown was back at practice today, but Darius Shepard was still out. So if injuries thin, certainly, you know, it's a benefit to have a veteran guy in the room anyway. I mean, let's remember that last year the Packers signed Ryan Grant, never played him, but they liked that veteran experience that he brought to the 53. So, you know, Seth Roberts is really the same way. And I think that it's going to be determined on injuries more than anything. But if injuries strike, then sure, yeah, he can absolutely be elevated as one of those 55.
Thank you, Wiley, for your question. Let's take another question here from Andrew, another good one. Andrew asks, what do you guys think 60-40 with running backs Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams as far as touches go this week? The Packers haven't had Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams on the field in a little while. Aaron Jones had been dealing with a calf injury for a couple games. Then Jamal Williams was sidelined this past week against the 49ers as he was on COVID-19 reserve as a close contact of A.J. Dillon. What is the Packers' plans with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams now that they finally got the two of them in the same game?
Yeah, I tend to think so. Let's be real about the Jaguars here. There's a reason why they're one of the worst teams in the NFL, and you don't really want to expend that much with your best players in terms of exposure to hits against a team that you're going to win and beat handily, even if you don't have to do that. The Packers, of course, they'll never admit that, but it's still reality. So, yeah, I would think that you would even it out as much as possible this week. And let's face it, a week after this week, next week, they've got a very different test with an Indianapolis Colts defensive front that is one of the best in the league, especially against the run. So I do think that it makes a lot of sense for them to want to try to keep both touches, especially for Aaron Jones, down as much as they can against Jacksonville, make sure he's fresh and rested against Indy.
Packers fans, if you want a preview of what to expect from the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans tonight, you're in luck. Thursday Night Football, you can go throw on the game and get a glimpse of what the Packers' opponents over the next few weeks are going to look like. Thank you, Andrew, for your question. We appreciate you joining in. Let's take a question here from Randall over on Facebook. Randall, good to see you. Is there any truth to the report that left tackle David Bakhtiari is looking for $20 million a year on his next contract? If so, can Green Bay pay that much given their other free agents? As Randall is alluding to here, left tackle David Bakhtiari becomes a free agent in 2021. The Packers, in most scenarios, would certainly love to keep him as he's been playing extremely well when he is healthy. However, they do have to consider all of the other 2021 free agents and whether or not to resign them, including running back Aaron Jones, cornerback Kevin King, center Corey Linsley. The list goes on. How likely is it that the Packers can afford Bakhtiari next season?
To answer the first question, that's his market. I mean, if you look at his caliber to what the market is around the league, it starts at $20 million. So yeah, that's I think that's fairly obvious. There's no question that of all the players that the Packers have in this core that's going to be going into free agency this spring, David Bakhtiari is the priority. Not just because of his talent, and he is an All-Pro. So there's no, I mean, talent alone puts him there. But if you compare a left tackle to a running back or even a cornerback, left tackle is an extremely important position. You have an all-pro left tackle, and you have an aging quarterback, and then in a couple years, you're expecting a quarterback transition to a young guy, to effectively a rookie. Having that blind spot, that blind side secured, and knowing that that's good, you don't have to worry about that. That's huge. That's worth a lot of money. As far as other free agents. David Bakhtiari a few weeks ago on his weekly radio spot in Milwaukee, he said it. He hit the nail on the head. Cap manipulation can do wonderful things, Olivia. If you can manipulate the cap with prorations, with how you structure years, you can fit a lot of players onto that cap. I imagine they try to go high on proration and try to backload the contract to get as many players, especially with COVID-19, expecting to drop the cap on that. Under that cap for 2021, I don't think that the Packers are in a position where they have to go either or. I don't think they have to choose between David Bakhtiari and Aaron Jones and Kevin King. There's things that they can do to manipulate that cap to be able to fit more guys on there. But yeah, David Bakhtiari, all-pro left tackle, guy you want to sign.
Let's continue our conversation on the 2021 free agents. We have a question here from Michael. Michael asks, if cornerback Kevin King is so consistently hurt, who do the Packers keep for next year? Aaron Jones, Bakhtiari, Linsley. With King's injury in consideration, he has missed the last 4 games with a quad injury. It's uncertain if he's going to be healthy enough to play on Sunday. How does that impact his future with the Packers?
Well, his future in general, it's so the longer he's out, the more money he's losing, because this is a player who has had some serious red flags with his injury history before. And he didn't have that last year. He had 5 interceptions, played 15 games last year. He was healthy, productive, needed to stay on the field this year, hasn't been able to do that. Now, if he comes back, whether that's this week or next, and he's able to be as productive and finish out the year, I don't think it's beyond being salvaged. I think that he can still just kind of rescue his market value here. But he's a really talented player, extremely talented, very productive when he's been on the field. He just hasn't been on the field. And NFL teams in their valuations, what do they say? The greatest ability is availability. They factor that in. So there's no question that the longer Kevin King is away from the field, the worse it is for him.
Thank you for your question, Michael. We'll continue our conversation on Kevin King. Marcel wants to know, with King and Jaire Alexander potentially out for the game on Sunday, who are the starters in your opinion? Who is most likely to start on the outside? We know that Josh Jackson has been subbing in for King. Now, with Alexander potentially out as well this Sunday, who is that other outside corner that the Packers can rely on?
Could be Kadar Holman. There's no question the top 2 in this scenario, if Kevin King and Jaire Alexander are both out, their top 2 are going to be Shannon Sullivan, who's their slot, and then Josh Jackson. And then you go down the depth chart from there. Mike Pettin today said that he thinks that Josh Jackson's played some quality reps for his defense, and he has. I mean, he's had some very not quality reps as well, or whatever the opposite of quality is. He's had those too. But he has also, in fact, had quality reps. I mean, he showed well for himself at times. So he's another, we talked about the defensive line, Kingsley Keke, Montravius Adams, guys that need to find some consistency because they've certainly flashed talent and productivity. Josh Jackson on the back end is very much like that as well. Find consistency because the good moments have been there.
Thanks again for another wonderful question, Marcel. That is going to do it for us tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back tomorrow to answer more of your questions. So if we did not get to you today, don't worry, come back tomorrow. We'll get to some of your thoughts tomorrow as well. For Ryan Wood, I'm Olivia Reiner. We'll see you next time.